Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the literature of the Harlem Renaissance, and we're fortunate to have with us Alana McLaughlin, who has been with us on a number of occasions to talk about the literature as well as some other aspects of the Harlem Renaissance. And of course, Alana, let me welcome you to the show this morning, and let me again tell you how delighted we are to have you here, and at the same time to remind our audience that you've been with us on a number of occasions. And so why don't you say something about your background, your education, and some of the things that are important in terms of your life that eventually brought you to us this morning, as well as to sort of give us an overview of the topic of the Harlem Renaissance. And I think that by that time we should have completed this first part. Let's start off with that.
Well, my name is Alana McLaughlin. As you said in the beginning of the show, I was born August 27, 2002, which would make me 10. Also, I am very involved in the church, as you are. You're the reverend, and I'm sort of the only acolyte that ever acolytes every Sunday. Every Sunday. I mean, even if I don't want to do it, I still got to do it. I mean, because that's just what I do in church. And now let's get on to the subject for today, the Harlem Renaissance. If you go up to a random person and say the Harlem Renaissance, they will think about jazzy music, piano, and all these little doobity-bop kind of things. But it was much more than that. Now, the Harlem Renaissance was actually, before people started calling it the Harlem Renaissance, it was called the New Negro Movement. And it was inspired by Alan Leroy Locke. And now, this movement spanned from 1919 to about the mid-1930s, about 1934, when the Great Depression started and the stock market crashed. Yeah. And so during this time, African-American writers blossomed. And I mean, French-speaking African-Americans from everywhere kind of bonded together, and that's how they basically had their break. That's like the Harlem Renaissance is one of the major reasons why we have such good writers today, like because most modern African-American writers were inspired by the New Negro Movement or the Harlem Renaissance. Like writers such as Zora Hurston, she wrote many books, and today we read like Their Eyes Were Watching God. We watch the movies and all these Jonah's Waterboard. Like we see all these, and you have to think about the Harlem Renaissance, because this is where all these African Americans bonded together to basically start the New Negro Movement. And then there wasn't always literature. There was music, like musicians like Louis Armstrong, like the trumpet. Like, I don't think most people know this, but the piano was a sign of wealth. Like, and today you can see anybody playing a piano. Like they have pianos in my band class, and then most of these children don't know like that was a sign of wealth. Like that wasn't available to just anybody back then. I mean, like they just think that they can play piano because it is, but it was really like a privilege back then, and it still is. And so those are some of the things that kind of made the Harlem Renaissance.
Now, Lana, within the context of all of this information that you've given us so far, what would you consider to be the most significant aspect of the Renaissance when you see it within the whole total of the history that we've often talked about on this show? For example, we know that during the Harlem Renaissance, Africans were called colored, and then they came up with a new name, New Negro, and all of those aspects of it. And so while we appreciate all of that information that you've given us, and we anticipate some additional information within that range, when we come back, let's talk about some of the reasons that Africans changed from being colored during the Harlem Renaissance to the so-called New Negro. I think you've given us some indication of this New Negro movement, but for the most part, I think, and we appreciate that information that you've given us, and I think you've demonstrated the kind of ability to continue carrying this information forward. And I think one of the things that we would certainly like to hear you say something about Harlem, in the sense that everybody believed that had you not visited Harlem, then you've never really been to New York, and et cetera, and those kinds of ideas and things that you've talked about with us on a number of occasions, and I'm sure that you're very, very in tune with it, you see. And so I think that you're giving us some excellent information, and we look forward to the second part as well as the final part of this show. And let me encourage our audience to that we'll be back following this very, very short commercial. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's talking about the Harlem Renaissance, and during the first segment she gave us quite a bit of information relative to some of the literature of the Harlem Renaissance. But now I think she has agreed that we should talk about what she considered to be the Harlem Stride style. And of course, Lana, let me not only welcome you back to the second segment, but to sort of delve into this idea of the Harlem Stride style as part of your rendition of some of the important events during the Harlem Renaissance. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Now, if you're just tuning in, I want you to know a few facts before we go on with the show. I'm Alana McLaughlin, born August 27, 2002, and today on the show we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance. Now, I started off the show in the first segment with talking about how Zora Neale Hurston influenced some of the writers of today, like Maya Angelou and other writers, and how it was such a big part of African American history. Now,